The president vows to hunt down and punish those responsible. Soon afterwards, missile destroyers dispatched to New York and Washington. Then at 5:25, a third building in the World Trade Center complex collapsed. An hour and a half later, the president was back at the White House, and senators were gathered on Capitol Hill presenting a united front and vowing not to fold to terrorism. BET's Andre Showell has been out and about on the streets of the nation capital today. He joins us now on the phone from the Pentagon. Andre, what can you tell us?
Cheryl, tonight there is a lingering sense of uneasiness here at the Pentagon. Firefighters are doing their best to gain control of the fire, but as I look over my shoulder, thick black plumes of smoke continue to billow out of the top of the Capitol. Most importantly, though, searchers will begin to scour this western side of the Pentagon where American Airlines Flight 77 crashed this morning. What are they looking for? They will enter that wing in hot pursuit of any injured survivors. Yes, survivors still at this point, and certainly any casualties. Now, overall, there are 24,000 people who report to work at the Pentagon, but there is no official word on how many are injured or dead at this point. Andre Showell reporting from the Capitol. Cheryl? From the Pentagon, rather.
Andre, can you tell us more? I know earlier today you were at one of the hospitals. What can you tell us about what was going on there, what you saw, what you heard?
At Washington Hospital Center, it was basically the command center for the arrivals of many of the injured. At that point in the early afternoon, 7 had arrived. 1 was discharged. As we were leaving the scene, they were beginning to gain more information about the identities of some of the injured. And also they were managing to speak even with some of the people who were able to speak with them to gain contact with family members and relatives who are understandably concerned. They were bracing at that point for any more victims that would have been transported to that hospital, and they were also coordinating with other hospitals to see how they could assist in this effort.
Andre Showell, thanks so much for being with us. Let's get some more of your input. Let's hear from Tommy in California. Tommy?
Yes. I agree with your guest speakers. I'm calling from California. I guess my question, though, is how do you feel about their honor, the honor that they seem to have, or the value that they put on honor seems to be so different from how we see it, as far as their allegiance to their people. Like I believe I heard someone say, well, you know, when they are,
Osama bin Laden.
Bin Laden, thank you.
Let me ask Tyrone Powers about that. We were talking earlier. Help Americans understand, I think, the cause and the willing to die for the cause from these terrorist bombers.
We don't. First of all, we don't know who they are yet. But I will say this: the difficulty we've had encountering terrorism is that it's difficult for America to see the world through other people's eyes. And a lot of the countries who believe that we have been too isolated from them indicate that we cannot empathize with them because they have been dealing with deaths and terrorisms and bombings, and we have not shed a tear over their particular situation. And now when it comes home, we feel differently. And so it's a different thought process. And I don't know really if we can, at this particular time, assess through our eyes what it means to them to die for a particular cause. And they're in situations, depending on where they are and what group this particular they are, they're in particular situations where they're not surrounded by the comforts that we have, and dying for a particular cause to them is the best possible avenue. And again, that's a situation that we can hardly fathom, that we hardly think about.
And they consider it an honor to die.
Well, yeah, some of the groups do consider it an honor to die. They're dying for a cause. It's not a suicide. Someone said today that suicide is against the Muslim or Islamic religion, if in fact it had anything to do with Islamic or Muslim groups. However, these particular incidents are not considered suicide. A suicide mission would be just to kill yourself. In these particular missions, you're actually carrying out maybe a fatah or special demand from some religious leader in your particular group. But again, it's hard to say because I don't want to get involved in in terms of pinpointing who it is at this particular point.
But whoever it is, clearly they were willing to die for the cause and die on the plane.
Members of the group were willing to die for a cause, not necessarily the people who planned the particular incident. And I want to clarify that.
I mean, of course, the ones who were on the plane.
I want to clarify that because we talk about fanaticism, and the people who actually plan these particular operations are very logical and analytical in their plan of the operation. The people who are willing, who they've convinced to go out and actually take their life for the cause, may be the people we're talking about when we discuss fanaticism.
Let me just give this station break. You are watching a special edition of BET Tonight Live. We are taking your phone calls. We want to hear from you, your reaction to this terrorist attack, the downing of the World Trade Center, as well as a hit of the Pentagon today. Let's hear from Kizzy in Ohio. Kizzy? Kizzy, are you with us? Serena. Thank you, Serena. Thanks for waiting.
Yes, how are you?
Fine. Your comment, please.
First of all, I would just like to say that my prayers go out to the family members who have lost loved ones today, and also those who also have been injured. But the main thing that I would like to say is that this is something that was prophesied by Jesus Christ himself, saying that in the last days, that these things will happen. And I just want to, in my comment, read a quote that was written in the 1900s by a writer called, her name is E.G. White. It says, "The ungodly cities of our world are to be swept away by the bosom of destruction, and the calamities that are now befalling immersed buildings and large portions of cities. God is showing us what will come upon the whole earth. He has told us, now learn a parable of a fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, and you shall see all these things, so that it is the coming of the Son of Man is near, even at the doors." And that's taken from Matthew 24, 32, and 33.
Serena, thanks so much. We're going to hear from Kizzy in Ohio. Kizzy, your comment?
Yes. Hi, my name is Kizzy. I was just going to comment about, how we shouldn't be surprised because in the Bible it does says these things will come to pass. Also, for something like this to have happened and for it to be so strict, so planned and detailed, this didn't happen just over 2 weeks or 3 weeks. This was probably planned for 2 to 3 to maybe 5 to 10 years ago. This was really detailed. These people were probably living over here, were probably friends with normal people like us. They had to get inside. So these people had to be working for the airports. They had to be, they probably had some help too. This was a 5 to 10 year plan. This is something that just did not happen.
Delegate Norton, discuss that because we sort of talked before about a concern about lax security in the airports, and here is a caller concerned about people on the inside maybe being involved in this for a long period of time.
Out of this episode, it is that our country needs a total and radical reevaluation of what we mean by security. The caller is speculating, and it's as good a hypothesis as any. It's hard to imagine that these people simply went through the ordinary airport security, although there has been speculation that the so-called knives they were carrying might have been of a special kind of plastic that enabled them to get through security. But it is at least as good a hypothesis that they came onto the runway surreptitiously, or that this was some kind of inside job and that they had lived for some time. Now, I'm sure that our intelligence has a better sense than the speculation we have here, but what we've got to do is take our blinders off and forget the kinds of things we think might have happened and put all the options on the table and then figure out, are we prepared to deal with all those options? Do we have the kind of security that would, in fact, keep all of those options from occurring in the future?
But you believe, Tyrone Powers, there is nothing we can do to really stop these things from occurring in the future?
Well, not absolutely. You cannot, unless you're willing to have a complete police state society, you're always vulnerable to terrorism. Now, obviously, we can increase our security, but for instance, if you go to the airport, you actually don't go through any kind of detection or metal detection device until after you leave the ticket counter. And so you're vulnerable at the ticket counter, you're vulnerable outside the airport, you're vulnerable in the parking lot at the airport. And so unless we're willing to set up a system almost as they have in North Korea, or set up a complete police state, we cannot be completely sure through security measures. Again, intelligence communities and what we have relied on, or what we're supposed to have relied on, certainly during the period that I was in the FBI, is human intelligence. Having people within these organizations that can tell you that this is about to happen, that this might happen, that something is afoot, and then preparing to deal with it in that manner. But you cannot completely protect yourself. In a free society especially, in a society in which we value our ability to move about without being searched, without being profiled racially or otherwise, you cannot completely protect yourself from this particular situation.
I want to speak to two situations that happened in Cleveland. We have a Cleveland Public Library. One day, a shooter came into the library and killed a number of people, and then we put in place a metal detector at the library. At the courthouse where I used to work, there was a decision or a discussion: do we put metal detectors at every door in the courthouse, or do we want to keep our courthouses open so that they are inviting to people to come in and receive justice? And so there was a decision to put metal detectors at courtrooms where we believe high-profile cases were going to go on, and people might come there with in mind to harm someone. It's a really difficult situation. I think Congresswoman Norton was speaking to the same issue earlier. The whole question of, do we open Pennsylvania Avenue again and allow people to go by the White House and be able to see? But what I think that we have to continue to think about is deterrence as well. And some of the deterrents are not necessarily a metal detector, but it's the conduct. How do we treat, or how do we handle these situations, and what is the aftermath of those situations? But deterrence is the thing that keeps America an open society and allows us to allow people to come and go.
We've got another caller, Starla in Michigan. Starla, your comment?
Yes, I have a question. I understand that there was an 18-minute difference between the two plane crashes, and I understand that maybe nothing could be done in between the first and the second, but I just cannot understand for the life of me why wasn't Washington put on alert after the two plane crashes. I don't understand how there was like a no-fly zone in Washington, and how could another plane get in our airspace at the Pentagon?
Tyrone Powers?
That's a dilemma. First of all, these are commercial airliners, and so even with the 18-minute gap and the gap between the last tower being hit by a plane and the crash at the Pentagon, I mean, someone has to make an almost quick decision to either use surface-to-air missiles to shoot down an airliner that's heading towards the Pentagon, or, I mean, that is it's clearly, if these were military planes flying over civilian airspace, then the decision is relatively easily made. But these were commercial airliners with citizens on them during a day when there's commercial airliners flying all over the country at all kind of angles. Any of those airlines, any of those planes that were in the air today could have possibly been hijacked planes. And so you would have had to go into this alert where you are almost prepared to shoot down any commercial airline. It was a difficult
That's why
dilemma.
they shut down the airports for that reason.
And it was so well planned. And trust me, the terrorists who were involved in this understood that we could not shoot down those planes as they headed for their particular target.
That's why they chose commercial jetliners.
Yeah, but notice that they did not attack the White House. Now, there's some sense that there was an understanding that you couldn't get close to the White House after that plane came into the White House. We must have done something, because they decided to go to Camp David and not the White House. And that says to me that I don't know if you could have done it within the 18 minutes, but there is some way, and I bet it's being done tonight, to have in the air the armed forces so that some targets become less likely than others.
But the question then would be, are you willing to shoot down a commercial airliner? When do you make the decision to shoot down an airliner full of 100 and some people?
I'm making another point. Why didn't they go to the White House? They would have preferred to go to the White House. They went to Camp David because they knew that the White House was under a certain kind of surveillance, and it would have been difficult to get to the White House. Why wasn't that kind of aeronautic surveillance around the Pentagon? Why isn't it around the Capitol tomorrow? What will there be that wasn't there today? that will make them not want to come to the Capitol where Representative Tubb Jones and I are going tomorrow. I bet there's going to be something.
Well, obviously you make a legitimate point, and there will be things in place tomorrow. And I think the closing of all airports and saying that any plane in the air now will be considered an enemy target or a possible suspect is what they responded to and what they did. They diverted international flights, some of them to Canada, to get them out of American airspace so they could quickly say that anything left in American airspace that wasn't a military plane, a U.S. military plane, could now be a possible target. And we really don't know where that plane in Pittsburgh was heading. We're speculating where it was heading, and we really don't know if other planes at other airports were not going to be hijacked too. I think at the end of this investigation, we'll see that the people who were willing to take a plane and take it through the towers at the World Trade Center may have been willing to even try the air defenses at the White House. As you know, it hasn't been too long ago that a small plane did land on the lawn of a White House, even with all those air defenses.
Let's go to Allison in Illinois. Allison, your comment.
My comment is, thank you for taking my call, but just wondering if this bombing had anything to do to disarray our attention from one of bin Laden's men that's supposed to be on trial tomorrow. Was this to disarray our attention from that trial to, you know, just kind of put a cloud over everything and not to have that happen tomorrow?
Any response to that, members of Congress, Delegate Norton or Stephanie Tubbs Jones?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear her.
She was saying if it was actually going to divert attention from a trial that was supposed to start in New York tomorrow?
Well, there was supposed tomorrow. Apparently, one of the terrorists who bombed the Trade Center was to be sentenced, and so there is speculation that whoever did this was sending a message and chose that day. Now, obviously, the intelligence experts are going to look at that to see if that is a workable hypothesis, to see if they can trace it back to find who in fact committed this. It's going to be a piece of evidence that's on the table.
Dwina in Maryland, thanks so much for calling. Your comment, Dwina.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. I have visited several bulletin boards and chat rooms, and I'm very disturbed that the American citizens are pointing their fingers at would-be people coming from the Middle East or Arab descent. And we really don't know who the culprits are who've committed this terrorist attack. I can tell you for sure that Americans, including myself, had the wind knocked out of me when I realized that it was Timothy McVeigh and not someone who we would suspect would be the usual suspects. And I have several friends who are from the Middle East who I'm sure are feeling quite nervous now because people are probably looking at them as suspects. You know, you have the last name Muhammad Ali, and you're a suspect. So I think we need to reserve judgment until such time as we know who the culprits are, if we ever find out. Because it could be a homegrown talent.
Dwina, thanks so much for your comment. That's something that we've been talking about throughout the night, and almost everyone here has been talking about not being so quick to rush to judgment. Delegate Norton, was that you or Stephanie Tubbs Jones who wanted to get in? Stephanie?
I was just going to say what you said, so I won't repeat that. I'll wait and then take another caller.
Okay, Adele from Texas, thanks so much for holding your comment, Adele. Adele, are you with us? Your comment.
Yes, first I'd like to say hello.
Hello.
First I'd like to say that I'm deeply saddened by the events that had taken place today. My question is, do we jeopardize our nation's security by the information that we provide in the news by our desire to know all the details? Because if that's so, in 1993, when the terrorist attack occurred and we released information that the building was sound from the bottom and that from the top it would be vulnerable, now it's hit from the top. Were we responsible in some way for that?
Dr. Power said something about that when we were off camera earlier today about that very issue, and I repeated his statement with regard to the vulnerability of the World Trade Center from the top. Again, I think we as a nation try and put a balance between giving the public the right to know, or the opportunity to know, and trying to preserve our secrecy and our security. It's a balancing test. It's a balancing test.
What do you think, I'll ask both members of Congress, what can the president or members of Congress do to allay any fears of Americans about this happening again in the next couple of weeks or months? What can be done?
Well, you know, you will notice that the president's, 5-minute speech this evening was basically inspirational and not operational. And there was a reason for that. He's still gathering intelligence, and he doesn't want to get out ahead of his own intelligence experts who clearly were caught flat-footed. So I think members of Congress and the president have to face up to the fact that we have met an entirely new enemy unprepared. And we have to tell the American people the truth. We are not nearly as prepared as we should have been. The caller who just called raised a very important point about how much can we let people know. When in this society, people want to know everything. What I was discussing before about how my notion of an open society with security act, what that bill would do is to have us gather an array of the best minds in the society in a multidisciplinary fashion. We are overly dependent only on security experts. We need to get psychologists and historians and sociologists and security people and armed forces people to the table to try to figure out an entirely new matter, one the world has not ever seen before. And that is, how do you keep a wide open society, because let's face it, we're not going to close down this society.
Let me ask
and face a new enemy of the kind the world has never faced before.
A question for all three of the panelists. America always seen as a superpower. Think globally. Do you think that the rest of the world looks at America differently now as a result of what happened and how vulnerable we were? Tyrone Powers.
Well, and other nations who understand terrorism do not look at us in a different light, because they understand that no nation, no matter how powerful, whether it was Russia, when it was powerful, the Soviet Union, can protect itself completely from terrorism. They're watching to see what the United States response is going to be to this particular event. But even the terrorists who perpetrated this event expect a response, and they will continue, if they believe in their particular cause, to target different countries. But they are waiting, the world is waiting for our response. But I don't think they look at us as any weaker because of this. I think they may be concerned about our reputation as having such wonderful intelligence agencies, such as the Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI. They may be concerned about that.
Well, wouldn't that be a legitimate perceived weakness, Delegate Norton, then?
It is a perceived weakness. Indeed, already we are beginning to have the second guessing there. You heard Mr. Powers say that we don't have human intelligence. We're overly dependent on technological intelligence. And watch for corrections on that in this appropriation process.
I think
Stephanie Tubbs-Jones.
Sure. I think also that across the world, the other countries are empathizing with us this evening. I think it was Shimon Peres I heard earlier this evening saying that everyone in his country were in fact saying to us that they felt that they had been hit just as America had been hit. What I think we really need to do, and I said this earlier, is to assess all of our security measures and figure out where we went wrong and move forward to try and make sure that we don't find ourselves as vulnerable as we have been previously. But as Dr. Powers has said, if someone has decided that they are going to be a terrorist and they're willing to bring into the country or into a building or at the risk of their own life, there's really nothing that we can do to stop them. I think that we have to be able to say to all of the world and to all of our citizens and residents that we're going to do all within our power to secure their livelihood and secure their families and secure their homes and our country. But that doesn't mean that we can do everything to secure them.
4 other airlines used in today's attacks were headed to Los Angeles, and that prompted officials there to quickly shut down the airport. Stephanie Frederick has been there all day, and she joins us now on the phone with her report. Stephanie?
Hello, Cheryl. Fear, shock, and disbelief here in Los Angeles as news of these attacks reached the West Coast. You know, the biggest fear is, would it happen here, and would it happen here next? Security was heightened all over the city. LAPD's anti-terrorism squad was deployed, and they're still on full alert tonight. LA's police chief is trying to reassure residents that everything is okay, everything is safe for now. There was an eerie silence at Los Angeles International Airport with all the flights grounded, the terminals closed, bomb-sniffing dogs searching every inch of the airport. But the big question many people are asking is, why were those West Coast flights targeted? We don't know. Relatives of the victims gathered at nearby hotels, and so did, too, some of the stranded passengers. We talked to a few of them today.
Kind of a normal feeling, but I think that this puts the rest of the country on alert that nothing is forever, nothing's solid, nothing's for sure. Your days are not promised to you. So hopefully this will bring us together again, and not just for a little while, but this will bring people together.
I am a little in shock and a little nervous about getting on a plane. I usually don't feel too threatened or uneasy about getting on a plane, but I will be a little uneasy when we finally leave to go.
Lots of people have gotten hurt. Glad it didn't happen here in LA.
That the city of LA is prepared to address this. It's all precautionary, but we cannot be more concerned and cautious after we see the vivid images on the television screen.
Our security should be tighter than what it is, especially in the airport areas.
Thanks to
Meanwhile,
Stephanie Frederick for reporting. Go ahead, Stephanie. Sorry about that.
I was going to say, Cheryl, that meanwhile, in support of a mourning nation, Hollywood shut down. You know, the Latin Grammys were scheduled for tonight. That's been canceled, so too has Madonna's concert, and Sunday's Emmy telecast, postponed for now.
Stephanie Frederick, Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Thank you.
We'll take another viewer phone call. Gail from Los Angeles. Gail?
Yes.
Sorry, Gail from Louisiana.
Hello, I'm from New Orleans. I would like to pose this question to Dr. Powers. The mission today involving those 3 planes was very well coordinated, very well orchestrated, perfect in fact. But the 4th plane went down in Pittsburgh. And I find it illogical to even believe that after the perfection of the first 3 planes, that this 4th one would somehow, coincidentally go down. Is it illogical? And it's incredible, that I would go there. But is it not possible for me to believe that American forces had something to do with bringing that 4th plane down before it reached its destination? Considering the perfect mission of the first 3 planes.
Good question, Gail. Tyrone Powers?
Well, that's a possibility. There are other possibilities, too. Because of the impact, if you listen to some of the witnesses today that saw that plane go down, you notice that they said how quickly it came down. It seemed to be flying correctly, so there could have been a struggle in the cockpit. The pilot and whoever was trying to hijack the plane, understanding that they have knives, not guns, could have been in a pitched battle, which could have brought that plane down. It'll be a lot of speculation. However, I think that the way, if the witnesses are correct and the way the plane impacted the particular ground, that if it had been a surface-to-air missile, you would have seen a ball of fire in the sky if the U.S. military would have brought it down with the weapons they used to bring planes down, rather than the kind of impact and the kind of descent that the eyewitnesses today described in that particular situation.
Okay, we've got Lisa from Illinois. Lisa?
Hello. I just basically wanted to, first of all, express condolences for the people that lost family members and friends. But my comment is, one of your callers made the statement that we need to be more acceptive or more wait until we find out exactly who did what. But it's somewhat difficult when you turn on the television and see the Palestinians gloating over the fact that these people have been killed. And one of my concerns is that the Americans are a little bit too lenient on the other people or circumstances that happen like this. I, in fact, have also friends from different countries, and I've often heard them make negative comments against our government, yet they're still here using our American dollars to send home. And I just wonder what type of steps are being done to kind of have a more strict governmental, I don't know what to say, focus on those types of things.
Lisa, thanks for your call, and she points out something we have not discussed tonight, and that is those reports that Palestinians were rejoicing in the streets. There are some reports as a result of what happened here in this country, as well as on some earlier reports on the network news about some initial reports pointing towards operatives of Osama bin Laden.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a couple of things to look at here, and none of them is to try to alleviate anyone from any guilt that they may have in this particular situations. But when you're talking about the Palestinians, first of all, the American media went straight to the Palestinians. They could have went to Northern Ireland and take a look at the provisional IRA, which is also a terrorist group, very effective, a terrorist group against the British. They could have went to look at Milosevic in Bosnia and Croatia because he's on trial. He's been arrested there. But we went right to Palestine because all the experts today was automatically linking it to Islamic organizations. Secondly, you're dealing with a people there in that particular area who are in the midst of a heated battle. And it is their belief that the United States is supporting Israel in that particular battle. So the reaction of the common folk on the street who are in the midst of a battle should not be an indication that a particular group is involved. That takes more thorough investigation. And again, the media could have actually taken that particular camera to some other places in the world, again, to look at Bosnia, to look at the Irish Provisional Army. And so I don't think we should read anything from that except that the media wanted us to concentrate on Palestine rather than any of those other hot spots in the world. In order to come to a conclusion about who committed this particular crime, it's going to take thorough investigation and not emotionalism, and not the media pointing the camera at any particular group who may be celebrating. That's not how you solve crimes. That's not how you solve terrorism, and we cannot be led into that in this particular case because, again, the consequences could be a war unless we do this the right way.
And to have a thorough investigation before the U.S. makes any move.
And certainly, and I don't think the United States will be if, in fact, they conclude that a particular group was responsible for this particular action. I don't think you will see weakness out of this particular country. The reason the United States and Russia or the Soviet Union never went to war because of the concept of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction. And they were so convinced that if one nation made a move against the other nation, the retaliation would be so great that the consequences, there was no benefits to the action. That is what we have lived off for the longest period of time, that no one would strike us because they were assured of destruction. And some groups are now saying, we don't know who those groups are, that they're willing to take that chance. The consequences to them are worth the actions, and that's what we have to deal with now.
Thank you so much. Lamonte in Florida, thanks so much for holding your comment.
Yes, good afternoon. I have a question for the members of your panel.
Okay.
Last week, there was a guy arrested for jumping the fence at the White House. Could that have any ties with this, with him saying that America is in trouble when he was apprehended?
Delegate Norton, you want to touch that one?
Well, I tell you, when you look at the sophistication of the perpetrators here, you have to wonder whether or not there was any sign of this ahead of time. People who jumped the fence at the White House are amateurs. These were anything but amateurs. We got to look far deeper to find who these guys are.
Derek from New Jersey, thanks so much for holding your comment.
Yeah. Yes, my question is to Dr. Powers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Yes, how you doing today?
Good.
My question is, I understand that we're putting all the attention to bin Laden and the terrorist groups overseas, but why aren't we putting any attention to Fabio Ochoa, the Colombian drug lord, who was just brought into the United States last week in Florida? And when he was brought here, the U.S. government or the FBI said they would bulk up security at our national sites, and nothing was done. I think with the diversion of this, with bin Laden being blamed, it could be Fabio Ochoa and his group.
Well, there's a dilemma here. First of all, you're right, and I think Reverend Jesse Jackson and Reverend Al Sharpton both said earlier, and I think all the members of this panel have said that we need a thorough investigation, and I don't think anyone wants to rush to judgment. And only at that particular point do anyone or have anyone suggested some kind of action. But secondly, even in our rush to blame Osama bin Laden or some other group out of the Middle East, the intelligence community is also hurting today. It's an egotistical thing involved in this too, because to have such a well-planned and successful terrorist operation, and make no doubt about it that this is an extremely successful terrorist operation, because terrorists bank on the psychological effect of putting a nation in fear. They call it, exactly, to be precise, provocative terrorism, to provoking a nation into doing something that it wants it to do. And if it does that, it's successful. Then in a sense, the government is giving these groups who they are speculating to have done this credit for being extremely proficient, extremely effective, and extremely professional.
Thank you. Zandy in North Carolina. Your comment or question, Zandy?
Okay. Hi. First, I'd like to say I think we need to stop giving them credit as far as how greatly planned out this attack was. And secondly, I'd like to find out what other alternative do we have except for to attack ourselves.
What I was going to respond to earlier was the comment by the young woman about making it very difficult not to blame the Palestinians based on the news reports that have been had. I am 100% in favor of what Dr. Flowers says, that we need to do an investigation and figure out what has happened here. And we as people of color know that over time we've been targeted or looked upon as being responsible for certain conduct, and we should be the last ones who are moving to point the finger at someone until we've come to a conclusion as to what is going on. To the young lady's question, what do we do? How do we respond? Again, it takes thorough investigation, and it takes us trying to assess what have we done wrong or what have we done right. And I understand that you don't think that we should applaud these folks for having done a good job, but the fact is they did do a good job to our detriment, and we have to work so that no one else can do this kind of good job on the American people again.
President Bush addressed the nation tonight. He said the nation saw evil today and vowed the United States would find and punish those behind this evil act.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed.
That was President Bush earlier tonight, who talked about what had happened and what the American response would be, and that America would do everything possible to find out who was behind this evil act. We now go to another caller, Broussard from Louisiana. Broussard, your comment?
Yes, my comment is that we, as the United States, and I've served this country for 23 years in the armed forces, that we've laid back too long and we've been too civil too long. It is time we take a forcive aggression and start handling things the way our country and other countries been handling our American people. Why should we sit back and just watch things happen and hoping that our fine investigating officers can resolve issues when we already know in advance what could happen and what has happened?
But you're not saying because we don't know who is actually responsible for these terrorist acts today that we should just lash out at anyone, are you?
No, we're not lashing out at anyone. we've already got very high intelligence who have already been informed of what is to come and what will happen.
Well,
Why should we always continuously way back before comment or before? We are more reactive than proactive.
Well, you know, I would disagree that we, in fact, lay back. The fact is that we have never been attacked on our own soil like this, ever. So we've not had any opportunity to respond because we've never had anything like this to happen. When, in fact, we have been attacked, when our troops were attacked in Saudi Arabia, for example, President Clinton struck back. So I don't think that there's been a disposition of the United States not to strike back. I think that the disposition has been to make sure that you do your homework before you strike back, and I think the American people would not favor simply lashing out at who we think it may be before all the intelligence reports are in.
And let me, if I may, let me add this. Numerous terrorist attacks, in fact, in the early 90s, 1994, 1995, over 300 possible terrorist attacks were thwarted, and without the public knowing about it, because the intelligence agencies did exactly what it was supposed to do in those situations. We also have to remember that even prior to that, we were dealing with terrorists because it wasn't until 1976 that President Ford decided that we could no longer assassinate people from other countries who we thought may be about to attack the United States. And the reason he brought that about was simply because he believed that if we got in the business of conducting assassinations for people who we think are going to act against us, then other nations would get in the business of assassinating leaders in the United States who they thought might act against them. And so we have been proactive for a long period of time. And again, this particular incident, I think, is an anomaly, which is why the intelligence community is going to be put on the spot, because people are going to ask, you've been successful for so long, what happened now?
So you also caution against a lot of second guessing then at this stage?
Well, of course, I think, again, I suggest that there are going to have to be questions asked about this intelligence lapse. Obviously, it's an intelligence lapse. Obviously, there were people in this country who planned this particular thing out from the time of day till the amount of time between one hijacking and the other. So those questions need to be asked, and they need to be dealt with. But what I'm suggesting is that the intelligence community have before, and we have been threatened before with terrorist attacks, and they have been stopped. So I think we need to kind of hash this thing completely out.
Let's go to another phone call. You're on the air.
Hello?
Sonia?
Yes, I'm Sonia from California. I'm a high school history teacher, and I wanted to make a comment from a historical perspective, and that being that the U.S. government has, for an extremely long period of time, had its hands in many government cookie jars in not only encouraging warfare within their countries, as well as creating enemies around our borders. And I haven't heard anyone speak on how America can look at itself as this big world power, and then through the media, the images through the media, like we're so innocent, like we haven't done anything to any other country, and then look upon this situation as an unexpected event when we have created so many enemies throughout the world. I just wanted to make that comment because we have lots of young African Americans, young people of color coming up in our society, and they don't believe in the government. They don't believe in the political power and the structures that be because of situations like this. They looked at the political process that went through last year with the campaign and the elections, and they want to have some real tangible things to go on to believe in our government system. One of the things I try to encourage in my students, but it is hard to do when we look at this from a historical perspective. I mean, there are so many incidents: Cuba, Castro, Vietnam, Korea, North and South Korea. There's so many things that we have had our hands in, and we always wipe ourselves clean and say, oh, we're better than thou.
But Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton?
As a teacher, you are obligated to teach your students just what you talk to them about, but also obligated to teach them to get in the position to be able to make the kinds of decisions that affect these United States and affect their families. Clearly, there are acts that the United States have engaged in that we are not shouting about. But today, we are currently dealing with a situation that none of us can shout about. We are all in mourning at this point, and we need to help our young people understand why we are in mourning, and that we as a nation must pull together to resolve this particular situation. I would also suggest to you that as we go through this process, that the young people will have an opportunity to learn and experience and understand the dynamics of government. But at no point should we not continue to bring them into the process. You cannot cure the ills of America by stepping outside of America. You have to get in here, get involved, and take your rightful place in our communities.
Delegate Norton, any reaction to what Sonia had to say about the America sort of coming across as innocent with its hands clean in past incidents and past skirmishes in other countries?
You see, I think Sonia is seeing what many of us are seeing. She's seeing cynicism about government among young people. It is very disturbing. They don't vote, and every time they see and act like this, which they don't understand, they remember abuse of power. Sonia is in a very delicate position. She can't say to the young people that what they see is not true. They saw Florida. They saw abuse in Florida. And if she's teaching young people of color, they particularly resented it, and many of them have turned away from the electoral process. But a history teacher is in the position to teach with balance. And one of the most important things, it seems to me, to teach about our country is that our country would never target civilians. And what has happened here, unlike even Pearl Harbor, which was a military target, is that, and if young people need to come to grips with this, for all of the sins of our country, it is a democracy. Nobody would ever target the Capitol, or we don't assassinate. Imagine this, we don't allow the assassination of leaders. This came in part out of the assassination of our own president, President Kennedy. So that a history teacher must, in fact, reaffirm that, yes, our country has abused power. Our country was a racist country for a long time. Our country abused power even in the last election. But let's also make sure that a history teacher informs her students of what makes our country truly different from every other country in the world and makes us often proud of what this country has done and what this country seeks to do.
If I can just add this, in a real sense, there's not a nation in the world that haven't participated in terrorism, and certainly we have had our hands in terrorism recently in Latin America, certainly with the Contras and the other events down in Latin America. We participated with death squads. The Central Intelligence Agency just in the 1980s and the 1990s have released information that say they assisted sometimes in the killing of our own American citizens, the nuns in South America. So I understand in a sense what Sonia is saying. We have had our hands in situations, depending on how you define terrorism, which is the attack, basically attack on non-combatants. We have participated in the attack on non-combatants. We've had financed the attack on non-combatants. We know about the Iran-Contra scandal, which happened in the 1980s under the Reagan administration. So we cannot deny that we have not in some way encouraged terrorism throughout the world and that it has come home to us. It doesn't make this event any less tragic. But what I think what Sonia is saying is that we must realistically and honestly cleanse ourselves, know thyself, even as we go forward to deal with this very tragic event that our children are dealing with emotionally, and they're asking people tonight, why us? Why did they choose us? And we have to be honest and truthful with them if we want them to become involved in the government process, and to make sure that as we go forward, we are no longer involved in the El Salvadors and in the Contra scandals and in the other events in South America and in the Panama invasion where numerous people of color was killed. We have to realistically, and as a history teacher, she has no choice but to point that out, even as we move forward to deal with this tragedy.
Thank you, and Sonia, we appreciate your call. And now we go to Nicole in Washington, D.C. Nicole, your question or comment?
Hi, I was just wanted to send all my condolences to all that were killed or hurt, and my thanks to everyone who, gave out their support to help. And my question is that earlier they made a statement on CNN and several other news stations that the plane that hit the Pentagon was intentionally meant to hit the White House. They made that statement before they found the black box, the tapes, or anything. So how can they honestly say that it was meant for the White House instead of the Pentagon?
Well, I didn't hear the statement, so I can't respond.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
there was some information that they had an idea, which is why Bush was not in Washington today, that the White House was going to be the target of a terrorist attack. Whether that particular plane was meant for the White House or not, we don't know. We know that there had been an alert international that we were going to be in imminent danger of a terrorist attack, but we thought it would be overseas at one of the military bases. And again, there was some preliminary information even before today that Washington, D.C. or the White House may be a target, which is what she's talking about. Early on the news, they said that Bush had some inkling. In fact, someone
and that's why he got out of town.
Said that he had some inkling that, or there was a threat. Now, how real they thought the threat was would have indicated how much of an alert they were on.
Were you aware of this, Delegate Norton, that President Bush had possibly had some warning, and that's why he was out of town?
And I doubt it, because I think these trips are planned well in advance, and I believe the president was scheduled to be out of town. Anyway, this was Education Week, and I don't think we can go off on things like that. The fact is that they get intelligence every day that the White House is going to be attacked. And there is no indication that anybody was prepared for this. If, in fact, they thought that the White House would be attacked, it seemed to me that there would have been a whole lot more preparation so that the rest of us weren't left flat-footed here.
And you may be absolutely right, but the person who made the statement today, and I'm just referring to what the caller made, the person who made the statement today was actually on the president's staff, was actually traveling with the president, and he kind of made it prematurely, and then they tried to pull it back. But I want you to know that the caller's information is based on a statement not made by the media, but made by a member of President Bush's staff.
Yeah, and I don't even doubt it, but I also don't doubt, and I'm sure you know this, Mr. Flowers, that they get
trips have been planned.
That they get these attacks, they get these statements every day. And so what was the difference between this one and the other one? The one thing I don't believe is that the president got out of town, quickly.
And left all of us here without any protection.
And again, I think I said this earlier, I don't think today is the day for us to make all of these speculations. Today ought to be the day in which we, as the American people, sit in mourning and come collectively together and empathize with the families who have lost their loved ones, and there are loss. It is a national loss that we are experiencing today. And I think then, as we have time to go through the process and do our investigation, and then be able to make statements and not speculate about what's going on.
I would agree.
And you saw a video earlier. The Pentagon is still in flames tonight. They have not contained that particular fire. We will have more coverage on that tomorrow night at 11. But first, Secretary of State Colin Powell today cut short his Latin American trip, but not before he took a stand for the democracy, which he says terrorists try to destroy.
Once again, we see terrorism. We see terrorists, people who don't believe in democracy, people who believe that with the destruction of buildings, with the murder of people, they can somehow achieve a political purpose. They can destroy buildings, they can kill people, and we will be saddened by this tragedy, but they will never be allowed to kill the spirit of democracy.
That was Secretary of State Colin Powell. Samantha, you've been very from Maryland. Thanks so much for calling in. Your question or comment?